welcome back to the committee program and to our favorite segment, Club. And today we are going back to Italy, which is, of course, the wellspring from which so many of Europe's politics can be examined in my favorite laboratory. When most Americans think of the Italian right in the post-Berlusconi era, they think of flamboyant showman Matteo Salvini and his league, whose social media beast was able to cut through onto the world stage. But last week, for the first time in a long time, we saw another party emerge as the largest in a poll in Italy, the Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, a party with roots in the Italian social movement, one of the post-war expressions of the fascist right. How direct a line can we draw from one to the other? How much is the recent success a result of not participating in the current technocratic Draghi government? And how much is a result of their current leader, the forceful yet disarmingly empathetic Giorgia Meloni? Lots to talk about today, and with our panel, we have someone who is quite literally focused narrowly on this subject as we speak, Francesca, a PhD researcher on populist parties in both Italy and Spain, and faculty of political and social science at the Scuola Normale and Superiore in Florence. And Daniel Albertesi, friend of the show, thank you for coming on, who is reader in politics at the University of Birmingham and PI for the Survival of the Mass Party Research Project, funded by the ESRC. PI is an English academic thing. We can save that for another time, but I will say that I left academics for politics because academics was too political. Putting all of that aside and jumping in, let's begin at the beginning. Francesca, how straight a line can we draw between the fascists, folks operating a fascist state, and Fratelli, who sprang into existence in 2012?
Okay, thank you, Aaron, for the question, and thank you very much for having me here. It's very nice. And so, to get back to your question, I think, of course, we can see a strong legacies, and in a way, that the connection between these new entities, these new party, Brothers of Italy, and the legacy of the fascism and the neo-fascist Movimento Sociale Italiano, the Italian social movement, is quite, in a way, it's quite there, it's quite clear. And of course, like many things underwent, and I mean, just let me try this very, titanic effort of kind of summarizing what happened between 1945 and 2012, when actually Brothers of Italy emerged as a full-fledged and autonomous party. So, as you said rightly, like after, at the beginning of the the Italian Republic in 1946, we had like one party, exactly the Italian social movement, that kind of inherited the legacy of the Italian fascism as a political ideology and also as a, in a way, system of life and understanding as well of the state. And what is important here to say is that among the founders of these parties, of this party, the Italian social movement, we had basically exponent, veterans that were fighting for the Social Republic of Salò. That was basically the resistance of the fascist party in the north area after the arrival of the Allies and the kind of like reconquering from the ally of the Italian peninsula in 1943. So at that moment, and of course, like the Italian social movement was a neo-fascist party, of course, with a lot of symbolically a lot of basically the political personnel that was part of that party was coming from this previous experience. And then what we line and fracture that we always draw as Italian or in general political scientists in the history, in the political history of the country is what happened in the 90s. What we should say, of course, is that basically the Italian party system until the 1992, let's say, was in a way frozen between different parties, something that Sartori defined bipolar system, bipolar pluralism, maybe. Oh, anyway, but so in this, we can say that in these 50 years, the Italian social movement remained a party, very small, at the margins of the party system. But thanks to the electoral, the electoral law, that was a purely proportional law. Basically, always managed to have representation in parliament. So it was there. It was small. It was never before, up to the 10% of the electoral consent and votes and so on, never gathering more than that, but always very present. What happened in the 1992 was basically like an earthquake for the political system. all the parties of the previous age, so the Communist Party, the Italian Social Democratic, or the Italian Christian Democracy, and so on, they all fell down for a number of reasons. Mostly, probably, the triggering factor was the explosion of this bribe bill, usually called, so like a corruption scandal that basically invested all the political arena. And so after that, we have the emergence of new parties, many of them populist, let's say. So one we all know is old acquaintance is the party of Berlusconi, so for the Go Italy, Forza Italia. And together with that, basically many of the forces that were marginalized, so the Italian social movement as well, managed to become more and more mainstreamed. And also the Italian social movement shifted, it changed label, it went through like a maquillage process and it became the Party of National Alliance, which was basically kind of involved in Berlusconi right-wing coalition, so was slowly mainstreaming in the process. He was kind of getting rid of some of the fascist symbols and rhetoric that were instead there from the Italian social movement. And at one point, they even merged together with the Berlusconi's parties. So that's another crucial movement, is 2009. We have this merging. So from only an electoral coalition in which parties were still, different and separate entities, they just became one political force. And to summarize, it didn't go very well. I mean, there were huge problems in terms of everything, basically, in terms of ideas, organization, ideological, programmatic stances, and so on. So the coalition lasted very shortly. And what we have, and this is how we get to Fratelli d'Italia, to Brothers of Italy, in 2012, the new party, this People of Liberty, exactly, was again was failed as a party, and we had we had a split again, and we had again re-emerging Go Italy, Berlusconi's parties, and the emergence of forces, other political forces on the right. One of these, the biggest one, the one that then gathered basically mostly of the support, was exactly Brothers of Italy, that was founded officially in 2012, and then started raising consensus already in 2014 when Giorgia Meloni was elected as the president of the party. So what happened in this process is basically that if the National Alliance tried to get rid of some of those more, let's say, problematic for a mainstreaming strategy, those symbols that were more problematic, so also the relationship with actually fascism and ideology and so on, we see that in Brothers of Italy some of these elements came back. Especially at the symbolic level. The symbol of the party is actually the symbol that was used by the Movimento, by the Italian social movement. So we saw, kind of this very, of course, it's ambiguous. It cannot be a direct type of call, but we see this.
But it's an open embracing, at least, of
exactly.
the symbol. They want everybody to know
exactly
that the road stops there.
Exactly, in a way, this is what is happening. And what is most important, I think, it's also the type of continuity in the political personnel. So all these people that are now in Brothers of Italy, where comes from, were socialized in that type of political culture, especially if we look at the elites, especially, the old senators and deputies that are sitting today in parliament, they all come from that type of political experience. And also, the new generation, let's say, so Giorgia Meloni or all her peers come from that type of political experience. And I think this is very important in stressing, again, another element of this legacy. And probably I stop here. I talked even too much.
No, that's amazing. You have brought us up to the present with clarity and speed and really set us up. So thank you. Now, Daniele, digging in on that sort of alliance with the kind of, right-wing consensus and where those differences are. What is the agenda of the party and how have they been pursuing it? What are some of their candidates like? Give us some texture.
I think what is useful in Francesca's summary is precisely, I think, to show us the extent to which if the right wins in 2023 as a coalition, which is, I think, a very realistic possibility, there would actually be a lot of continuity with what has happened since the fall of the so-called First Republic and the emergence of new parties. First of all, as Francesca said, the party that has been the center of the political system for 25 years, Berlusconi's Forza Italia, thanks to which forces which were very heterogeneous, the League on the one hand, back then a regionalist party, the social movement that soon after allying with Berlusconi became National Alliance, a nationalist party with its roots in, let's say, post-fascism. How these two parties came together was thanks to this Silvio Berlusconi. Now, Silvio Berlusconi is no longer the fulcrum of this alliance, and indeed is no longer the fulcrum of the political system in Italy. However, a government that was to take over in 2023 would, in my view, be in many ways similar to the governments that we've had 4 times before, because we have officially 4 different Berlusconi governments in the past, although 2 of them followed each other, but it's 2 distinct ones. So what we would have is again a combination of quite radical nationalist post-fascist cultures together with a hardly more difficult to define entity, which is today Salvini's League, and Berlusconi's Forza Italia, which I see as a populist centre-right, if you want, party, which has always been very flexible in accommodating the more radical needs of its allies. Right. So I think, in my view, this will be continuity. Now, focusing on Brothers of Italy specifically, I think to understand Brothers of Italy today, it's useful to compare it with the League. So we were saying before the start that it's also still today, Brothers of Italy is stronger in the center and the south of the country. The League still remains stronger in the north, despite the fact that the League is officially no longer a regionalist party that only wants to speak on behalf of the north, but has become, thanks to Salvini, a nationalist party itself that says it wants to represent the whole country. And in fact, its new slogan is Italians first. It's no longer Northern Italians first. So you have this now clash, and I think ideologically they are now pretty similar, between 2 entities. One is a kind of traditional post-fascist, nationalist, radical entity, which is based on that culture and still sends signals to quite radical environments, sometimes even extreme right environments. And they send these messages. We heard that, in the party logo, you still have part of the logo of the old social movement. But apart from that, if you look at Meloni's speeches, sometimes there are references that you understand if you are part of that environment. So it sends these messages, but also it's branching out to a much more moderate kind of right. And that is, in that sense, to answer your question, that's where the abilities of Meloni as a communicator come into play. Her biography, which was autobiography, just published, how she behaves on television. She's obviously targeting not just the electorate of the League, but now also Forza Italia, which is a spent force. So you have this double game, which is very interesting. On the one hand, we're not giving up on our more radical supporters, and we send messages to them. On the other hand, we are also targeting a much wider constituency. Now, in this, the one that is now, in my view, in trouble is Salvini, who's done extremely well. I mean, if you look at it, forget whether you agree with him or not. I mean, if you, I think, assess him as a political leader, he's taken a party at 4%, and he's gone up to
incredible talent,
incredible success,
political talent.
It hasn't been stopped by his own party in transforming it in radical ways, because I don't know of any other example of a regionalist party that becomes a nationalist party. I mean, go and ask the SNP in Scotland or in Catalonia, go and ask them whether they want to represent the whole country, and they'll tell you if we try to do that, we wouldn't have a meaning, right? So for me, who was born in, observing the previous League, it was quite a shock to see the League trying to become a nationalist, nationwide party. So he's managed to do that, basically has been allowed to do that. But now, in my view, he finds quite a problem that is very difficult to resolve. So he is part of a government which is a little bit the government of everybody. And now, for the first time, he's got a competitor on his right, which is outside the government and is very able to point out whatever the government does and the right-wing electorate might not like. So when the League, before Salvini, when the League was part of Berlusconi governments before, it always chose enemies and allies within the government. But it didn't have a radical right force outside to compete with, because the National Alliance that Francesca was talking about was also part of the government. Now, they are part of a government which is obviously has no clear identity, because by definition, Draghi's government is everybody. But now there is a radical right party on their right, which is targeting not the whole electorate, but the right-wing electorate, from the extreme right to Forza Italia. They don't need to try and target the left. They'll never get many votes, or any, and also there's no need, because Meloni just needs to be the largest party within the right so that she can become prime minister. That's what she needs to do. She needs the right-wing coalition to win, number one. Second, she needs Brothers of Italy to get one vote more than the League. Then, according to all the agreements they made in the past, there's no reason why she shouldn't be the next prime minister. Now, I'm sure that Salvini and Berlusconi will find excuses, but for instance, they've started talking about creating a federation, which is precisely to stop Meloni. But still, I mean, you know, people and voters are not completely stupid, and so there is a limit to what you can do. And that's her aim now. It's for the right-wing coalition to win and for her party to get one vote more than the League. So it's a good strategy, and I think Salvini, has a problem, because he wants to be in a government and exercise influence within a government, and that makes sense. But on the other hand, now he's got somebody outside throwing stones.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think it's sort of, especially in Italian politics, sort of having the shine taken off of him just is so damaging, because it's a winners win and losers lose kind of situation. And like, you know, he sort of doesn't feel like he's on that trajectory anymore. But speaking specifically of Meloni, Francesca, how do you see her trying to bridge this gap between the proper populist right and Forza Italia folks who may be business oriented, you know, just the kind of big tent? Specifically with some of the issues, whether that be social welfare, minimum wage, relationship to Europe specifically, I think.
Exactly. Like, I think, I mean, from a programmatic point of view, definitely, like, we have seen, like, you know, the discourse about, like, basically, like, about, you know, everything that is concerned to economic issues, basically, like, you know, kind of like directing the attention of the party toward, especially in this time of pandemic, actually, we saw that very much, you know, the kind of, you know, like giving welfare to all, you know, and providing basically, you know, state supports to small owners, you know, shops, restaurants, coiffure or whatever, you know, so big, like small, basically like firms and enterprises, and basically this, I would say, I would define, like, you know, into sociological terms, this stratum of the Italian population that is composed by, you know, petty bourgeoisie and middle owners and so on, which is in a way, like the ground, no, where basically at the very beginning, back in 1994, also like Berlusconi support was ingrained and so on. And this is, I mean, it's also like, of course, but Salvini has very much the same audience, especially because, as Daniele was saying, obviously, like his strongholds of votes is in the northeast of the country. That is also the most, let's say, economically developed country, part of the country. So, from an economic point of view, the other like strategy that Meloni is actually, I think, implementing a lot is the provision of social welfare. So, in a let's say in a very paternalistic type of way, so it's almost social assistance, but not, you know, not universal benefits and so on. And of course, with this type of issues, so stressing, you know, like, and they redirected her attention to this type of issues is, of course, very, you know, like, you know, in a positive light for that part of the country, which is instead the south, that of course, like, suffers of different type of structural economic problems, let's say, and of course, like most population is much more interested in hearing this type of, like economic discourse and economic support. This for what concern the issues. I think another element that is actually quite important as well in this like differentiation of trying to, position ourselves between two different type of audiences, so a more radical one and a more moderate one, is also like the very strong point about conservatism, and especially like social conservatism, so in terms of values, no? And of course she kind of revived in a way that, also Salvini did that, but in a much more strategic way, but like posing a lot of attention on the, Catholic heritage and the Catholic nature of the country and the Italian population and so on. In a way, she's much more effective in doing that and much more credible in kind of like showcasing this type of issues. And this is also something that, of course, can, win the heart of the moderates, or at least of the Italian voters. And I think these are two elements that are pretty present and pretty strong. Of course, the immigration issue also works, but this is the thing on which she also like has to, share path with Salvini very much. So it's really like a bit of a battle of positioning and, kind of like shifting like from of distancing them, like the two parties. This is what they are doing. They are trying to find like a way to distance themselves and, kind of find some kind of identity and ownership on certain issues to basically like attract small pieces and bits of the electoral front. I don't know whether Daniele maybe has something else to
I want him to yes, please jump in. Also, add to that the extra idea of potentially the biggest prize that either Meloni or Salvini could pick up being precarious workers who are Cinque Stelle voters currently, right? And who the PD has the hardest time sort of scooping back up. So as you're filling us in further, Daniele, can you just tell us who you think has the kind of inroads on this, and if I'm right about that?
Yeah. Well, before I do that, just to link up to what Francesca was saying, social conservatism, traditional values. I agree that Salvini sometimes sounded, let's say, a bit less credible than a kind of traditional force, such as Brothers of Italy, that clearly is rooted in that kind of tradition. And if we look at also economic proposals, the Brothers of Italy is proposing much more support for families, which is an idea also very popular among populist radical right parties across Europe, of course, when you look at Poland and so on. And it's proposing to get rid of the guaranteed citizens' income introduced by Five Star, but replace that kind of support with something much more targeted to families. So that is kind of classic policies that a conservative or radical right party might want to put forward to argue that the country needs more children, and that's how. By the way, more support for families would be a good idea. Incidentally, it's not a bad idea in itself, in the sense that it is very hard for women, for a number of reasons. For instance, to get a little bit of support if they decide to have a child. So it's not. It can find a very wide audience, regardless of who is saying this. Now, on the other theme of Five Star. In part, Five Star in 2018 clearly managed to attract kind of 70% of its voters were more left-leaning, but there was a strong 30-35% that were from the right, and there are studies on this. So in 2019, it was still generally managing to attract at least some, a considerable amount of voters also from the right. Now, in time, more recently, Five Star has lost support also because it's become very clearly, let's say, a part of a near left. I don't know what to call it, because the word left in there sounds a little bit too radical. Center left, near left.
It's like center/center left. It's not
yes,
center/left.
Center
left.
Coalition that might look left once in a while, but so. Basically, we are talking about the Democratic Party and the Five Star. So clearly, they see their future as something that they now have to work on as a kind of together. Although whether the 5-star will exist 6 months from now is a different debate because of what is happening within it, and it's imploding. But some kind of agreement between whatever is left of the 5-star or a new party created by the former Prime Minister Conte and the Democratic Party is clearly on the card for the next election. So they've already lost 5-star, they've already lost a lot of support among those on the right that for a moment voted for them thinking that they were beyond left and right. Also because some of the things I've said about Europe and about immigration clearly appealed to right-wing voters. Now I think it's for them would be much harder to fish in this pond. Also because you have a very credible actor on the right, and she's looking like a winner. Salvini was looking like a winner 2 years ago, and he was. As I said, I think what he's done is remarkable. Now, and these things are, we live in a world of social media in which these narratives start sticking very quickly, and then changing them is very hard. Now, Meloni now looks like a winner, and winners attract more votes. A winner is everybody likes to back a winner for a change, and support somebody who's going to win. So, the more it's a kind of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to an extent. In fact, when Brozovic started growing and started coming nearer to the league, then everybody started saying they're about to overcome them, and sure enough, that also affects the electorate, and more people think, I'm going to back the winning horse here. So can they attract more of the 5-star voters? I think they can, but to an extent this has already happened. I mean, we've had the 5-star representatives moving to them in Parliament. I think we've already had a fair amount of voters moving across. And then there are other people who stick with 5-star because they always saw themselves more left-wingers. Because, after all, 5-star was very similar to a Green Party for a little while at the beginning. So, these are issues, by the way, that have become mainstream with climate change. So it is not surprising if they still have a kind of large following among people who see themselves as left-wing in terms of social issues and interested in the environment and interested in individual rights. But on the other hand, that there is a strong, let's say 30-35% of their vote in 2018, which was actually coming from the right. I think they already lost a lot of this, and you can see it in the polls.
So this has already moved in the polls. I think that does make a lot of sense. Francesca, in terms of things that we should be looking for, look, it's Italian politics. We never know exactly what will happen. I don't know if anyone has eyes on Renzi, where he is right now, what he's doing. The government could obviously, it's, this technocratic Draghi government could find itself in very choppy waters. What should we be looking at in terms of knowing how we think the right will do generally, and Fratelli specifically, as the next year or two unfolds? What are the kind of signs for our viewers to be looking at?
Well, first of all, political scientists are usually not very good at predictions, I must say. So let's,
yeah, that's true.
What I could say on that, I would say, of course, starting from the point that I don't think that, for now at least, the Draghi government is too much in a pressure or danger. Of course, all the movements and tectonic movements within the 5-star movement might affect that, but all the people that are actually now in the governing front, they have no interest whatsoever in losing this type of advantage. So even though there will be splits and new parties coming up and so on, I don't think that the government is gonna fail in the next 6 months, or at least I want to be positive and have a positive mind on that. But I don't think that this would be the prediction of something that would have really happened. The thing is that, of course, in this, this type of status, even more, is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for the other side, because obviously Meloni, from her opposition status, would keep on.
That's what I mean. It's a trajectory for her, just better and better as it goes on.
I would say,
is that something we should see her pulling away further
exactly,
and disagreeing more?
But I would say that, yeah, I mean, this is probably like it's a paying strategy for her. And also, like, she has been calling for election ever since. So already when the second Conte government was formed back in 2018, like October, September 2019. So that was already, like, you know, the moment where she started this kind of message. Okay, we want election, we want the Italian again to, like, the people, obviously, like, to go on the, in the government.
She has the democratic kind of message.
Yeah, like the plebiscitarian populist, if you want, kind of message, definitely so. And she has never, like, you know, got back from that. Of course, I think she's very, like, aware of the fact that she's gaining a lot of support. But this idea of, like, also, you know, there has been a discussion about, okay, we have to vote the President of the Republic, so not the Prime Minister, and actually Draghi, that is now the Prime Minister, was one of the candidates for that position. And the problem is that, of course, if Draghi becomes the President of the Republic in the next 7 months, of course, we need a different government. So the only reason why, for example, Meloni was backing the Draghi candidature from her own interviews and so on, as the President of the Republic was, okay, if we have Draghi as the President of the Republic, then we will finally go and vote and, you know, let the people express their will and blah, blah. So I think, in a way, I mean, she's pretty much set on a very positive trend. Of course, nothing is settled in politics, and never, like, even more so in the Italian politics, but I would, you know, like the type of provision that, you know, Daniele was talking about, so she managing to, you know, backing up, like, kind of supporting the overall right-wing coalition, and her party as the major, like, you know, partner of the coalition is something that is fairly, yeah, I mean, probable.
Yeah, no,
nice, but yeah.
Yeah, and we're not here to give her advice, but as a final thought, Daniele, I mean, do you, again, as we're observers, especially folks in America watching, trying to navigate these two poles, would you see her trying to do both things, sort of appease business interest as well as little bits that are more populist, more social welfare, or just trusting that business understands it's good if the right gets in power, let me do what I need to do? Or don't let me put words in your mouth. You tell me. You understand what I'm saying? Like, what's the path?
I think she will try to keep appealing to both a kind of more radical right electorate and a more moderate electorate, which in part is still looking at Forza Italia, although, as I said, Forza Italia is now a spent force and it attracts around 8% of the vote, but still it does attract that amount. And in Italy that is possible also because I suspect that a very large number of centre-right voters do not really see Brothers of Italy as a neo-fascist extreme right party as it is talked about in the international media. Because I think that Italian voters are actually used to parties that originally, decades ago, had their roots in that kind of culture, but which have existed in the political system now for decades, whether you call them National Alliance, Brothers of It, and they have been part of government for decades, and there are a lot of people, when you say, you know, is Meloni a neo-Nazi, would say, no, that she's not a neo-Nazi. So they kind of, I think this transformation has been digested in Italy many years ago, because as I said, I mean, when Berlusconi brought the social movement into government, it was quite a shock, but we're talking about 30 years ago, almost 30 years. So then they've been part of that nation in power with the left for many decades. So that's the first thing. I think that she can afford to try and target the center as well, and she will go on.
Can I
that.
jump?
Second, I think she's.
Sorry,
yeah,
because
please.
I just wanted to. I mean, it's really. I mean, I think the focus on the party is important, and as you said, I mean, my generation was not raised with the Italian social movement in place. We don't really know about, you know, those times. So it's really there is an element of normalization. I think in this type of strategy, also what really plays a very important role is that Meloni is really playing the gender card very hardly on that. And obviously, you know, like this is a typical thing, and we have seen it in different countries as well, from so like populist radical right parties or, you know, like extreme parties having then a women leader, because actually, you know, like it gives like a more polished, moderate type of image as well to the party in itself,
right
to
out
the
of the gate. Yeah.
exactly to the ideology of the party. I mean, and we see that like very, I think very blatantly in the Italian case. She is exactly kind of, you know, mixing and, you know, softening the tones of what would be instead like a super kind of like, you know, macho leadership, let's say like that, with a lot of masculinist tropes and so on. And she really managed to mix these two registers, one with the other. She is very strong, as we say before, so she's able of very, you know, like flamboyant speeches and so on. But on the other side, you know, she play also on Instagram or on social media these, you know, the motherly side.
Maternal.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. She's good.
But
Social.
isn't this also the fault of the others? Because, I mean, for all the talk about equality, in the end, you know, the Partito Democratico, Democratic Party is always led by men. 5-star, if you look at the people who are at the top, who actually have decided its destiny so far and are now killing each other at the moment in this infight, it's all men. So, I mean, it's not her fault that she's the only leader of a large party.
The last two regional
in Italy.
elections
the
that
is,
Lega
it doesn't
took
happen.
to the PD were, of course, Ciccardi, Susanna, you know, in Toscana, and then Lucia Borgonzoni in Emilia-Romagna. They seem to have, the right wing seems to have an infinite supply of young women who are ready to do things.
Yeah, but they rarely get to the very, very top. And here you have a party that with Meloni has gone from 2 or 3% when it was created to now over 20, led by a woman. So, as Francesca says, she can play the card of saying, you know, we are also the only party who is kind of giving visibility to female leadership, which happens to be true. That is what I'm saying is that a lot of the reasons for their success is that these things are handed on a plate by the others. The same applies to her position as the only opposition. I mean, how can you not have an opposition in a country, right? And I think that technocratic government have been very, very detrimental to the quality of Italian democracy, and this one in particular is another one. So can you have a system in which everybody's in government and is that healthy? Well, you have to define completely a political system if you want that. I mean, in Switzerland they do things differently, very effectively, but it's a complete different world, right? So now you have a situation which everybody's in. Okay, so who gives voice to those who might be critical of various decisions that are taken? Because the decisions are always political. That there is no technocratic decision
monopoly in
the world. It's always political.
An incredible thing to have.
It's only her. It's only her, which also in practical terms means that the state broadcaster has to give a space. This is very important because there are rules. So they have to give a lot of space to the opposition. It's like 1/3 to the government, 1/3 to the party supporting the government, and 1/3 to the opposition, except that the 1/3 to the party supporting the government has to be split into 25, and the opposition is always her. So it's brilliant. I mean, when you think of, as a political leader, where do I stay? I mean, obviously the League decided to be in to influence where the huge amount of money that is coming from Europe can be invested. So that was the main reason. They said it quite explicitly. The regions in the north, which is the industrial heart of Italy, want to get a share of this money. So they are there to make sure that this happens. But she's decided instead to be out, but it's the only party that is out. You don't even have a left-wing party that is critical of Draghi. They're all in. So, of course, it's very easy for her to play the populist card and say, we are the only one against this bunch of people who are all the same. Well, maybe yes. Let's see what I mean. That a lot of what she's saying has been actually handed to her by her opponents, and the gender card is the other thing. I mean, obviously the other parties talk, but when do you actually see somebody with a woman in a position of real power, not just kind of a local, but real power? In Italy it doesn't happen.
Or with a lot of difficulties of always out of concession by some dude, but that's another.
Right.
Maybe
Where
we
it feels
go
like a
out
token
of,
thing.
Exactly.
It feels like
Yeah, it feels a lot like that. Then, of course, one thing is playing the gender card and having all this stress, stressing the fact of being the only women leader, and of course embodying, that type of also motherly leadership and so on. And of course, like thinking about certain type of women interest. Then, of course, is a completely different thing. The type of gender policies that the party is interested in. But this is definitely like maybe another topic. But in a way, this discourse that also kind of, go in the same direction of like many other instances of what we would call neoliberal feminist type of attitude. So, the women that managed to, break the all-men panels, the all-men leadership and so on, out of meritocracy, out of merit, out of her own personal individual characteristics and so on. This is obviously like a discourse that is very well spread. I mean, we can discuss about the extent to which this is actually a type of discourse and standing that actually really support women interest or etc. So that's a different type of, but definitely we see that a lot. I mean, she will never call herself a feminist, obviously, but she really embodies also this type of values from what is called usually neoliberal feminism.
No, it's better. So, call yourself a feminist is divisive. To be a woman who is comfortable wielding power is a story that, as Daniele says, she's now going to be allowed to tell on television as often as she wants. She will be there. She can be booked as much as she wants. She already is. So I guess everyone should settle in for a few years of seeing a lot of Giorgia Meloni. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. Sorry, Francesca, you want to get closing word? You have something to say?
No, it's okay. I mean, I think the other, another element that is also super important in a way, it's competence. But, she also, depict herself very much with this very, high competence as a competent politician, like a professional politician, which I think, not a technocratic one, but, like a competent politician out of experience. So it's really about, belonging to a certain type of political community and so on. And I think this is also very effective for kind of attracting the type of moderate electorate we were talking about before. I mean, this is and it's very peculiar as well because it's a style that is completely in opposition to other type of populist movement that we have seen in the country, like the Feister movement. So obviously the a leader that managed even to embody at the same time some populist claim, but on the other side as well this kind of professional ethos about politics and how politics, what is politics about and blah. Of course, this is also part, from my understanding of why she is actually so successful at the moment. So maybe this is also something that we should take into account to try to develop strategies that kind of change or try to undermine that type of discourse. But I don't know whether there is an ending really, but
She's the right woman for the moment in that she does embody both, just out of who she is, both ends. And I think you're absolutely right about that. Daniele, Francesca, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope we can have you on as the next unexpected thing happens in the unfolding Italian political saga that is.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having us.